Happy Chinese New Year, everybody. The year of the horse, the flaming horse, the fiery horse. And what else? It's Tuesday, and we gotta talk about, I was pessimistic about Rupert Lowe from, all of his speeches and stuff because as much as I want him to succeed, I find that it's almost an unreasonable undertaking. Like, we're talking about embedded, you know, systematically corrupt government officials, people who are citizens who report to those people, the drug trade, human trade. Like, there's actually human trafficking going back to Pakistan. And then the mayor, it's himself is a Pakistani, you know? So, like, what he proposed was re-immigration, which is basically you go back to where you came from, right? With some submission sufficient reason, right? Like, so it's like you're not just like going around grabbing everybody. Like, if you came into the country illegally, if you committed a significant amount of crimes, if you don't know how to speak the language, if you don't, like, there's a bunch of stipulations, right? And you know what? Maybe I'm a little early to the party, but I'm not hearing the whole media circus behind, this guy being this right wing, fascist, racist, anything like that. It's almost as if they've accepted that Europe is a problem that needs to be solved collectively. And it's almost like a tidal wave. So if Rupert Lowe comes into political party and power in the United Kingdom, most likely Canada is going to follow suit. We're going to have our own like version of him. America basically has Trump, but like people are like talking about JD Vance and all these like, good things here and there. And we have to think about what that means. Like, if these people all cooperate together and they all start, copying each other's playbooks, right? We're going to be looking at possibly what I call the reverse melting pot or the melting pot of misery. Mind the typo in the title. That was my character limit of oh. But think about it like this, right? So you had America, and by extension Canada and Mexico. I think I could be wrong about Mexico being a melting pot. I think it's just for like specifically the Spanish ethnicity, because I don't really see any other ethnicities outside of like the Native Americans or Native Mexicans, I guess, right? So you go to America, bring your sick, your whatever, all those euphemisms for like the positive, like, makeup of the American, population and stuff. And then from there, they're like, okay, well, now that we have like more people in, like, how do we like just utilize them and stuff? And even though it's the whole mantra of diversity is our strength, diversity is the strength of corporations to maintain a stranglehold over their employees. So by hiring internationally, you can justify, systematically stagnating the paycheck raises of all your employees because of the viability in your market, which is just translation of like you don't want to be making less money than the other guys, so you have to do what they do. It's ironic how like even though they say we're like a capitalist market and like there are companies that very much obey those like rules and stuff, like they just like operate on their own. Like we still have huge ass monopolies, like Google is a monopoly, Microsoft is a monopoly, I hate to admit it, like there's just like all monopolies. Like Nintendo's one hell of a monopoly. I could argue Sony is also a monopoly, and I'm a big ass Sony pony, but I think it's more of like a collective. Like they're profitable like with pretty much every venture, more or less. So like I don't think video games is their major one. Like they have movies. which I think like they have John Wick. They're coming out with a John Wick game and the John Wick movies. I have basically all of them. I gotta get the last one, and then I get the first one on Blu-ray. So everybody's supposed to like bring something to the table. Make international cuisine. Like have multi-ethnic, multi-linguistic languages and this and that. And then somewhere along the lines, like racism just like took hold and never went away. And I think it was just World War II when you see just how horrifying like it is when you have like these communists starving out. Well, technically it's the Nazi party, but like they were basically communists. And the big fear about communism was in the beginning, and like not a lot of people know this, but in World War II, the Soviet Union and the Nazi party were allies for like the longest time. It was just over Poland, like they didn't want to like settle with it, and Germany wanted more, and then they decided like this is the weakest point of Russia, because Germany was always like intentionally trying to kill off Russia because it was like their strongest opponent. And ironically enough, they wanted to ally with Great Britain. They didn't want to go to war with America and the UK or Great Britain at that time, right? It was just the whole Pearl Harbor thing, and there's a whole thing about how America was like running this like trade war on Japan, and like how they forced them to the table of World War II. Although like you can argue that Pearl Harbor was a pretty cowardly attack and this and that, but like these are things that happen in the time of antiquity and like far past you know any relevance more or less today. Now, why am I bringing that up? Well, can you imagine being forced to not only put aside your grievances, your racial divisions, and all that stuff, your religious, biases, this, that, right? But also like live shoulder to shoulder, neck to neck with like people that you despise, basically. And then you have something like New York City, or Los Angeles, or Chicago, or Minneapolis, or like pretty much every major city in America has become like this. Like I said, it's the dark Jews, right? The dark Jews have an idea for how they want us to live our lives, but these things don't apply to them, right? Like the upper class, the celebrity, the music artists, and it's like they all have to partake in some sort of humiliation or dark ritual to maintain that status on, or else like they lose it. And that's why you see sometimes these stars just like doing weird ass shit, like they put on like a fucking dress. And like, hey, I'm not trying to like front on anybody's sexuality and shit, but I just find that like funny how like excuse me, Dave Chappelle brings up that a lot of movie producers, a lot of whatever execs, they want mans in dresses, and it was just like, and like if that's what you want to do, fine. But I found it's just so like demeaning and belittling. Like you just want that fetish, that fetishization, that humiliation of this man. You want Dave Chappelle in a dress? Like fuck that. So America had like this internalized, division that I think like never went away, and it only became worse after Vietnam, when you start seeing yourself going to like these like third world countries and watching like Russia basically galvanize the communist Vietnamese people to like just fight these Americans in the jungles of Vietnam. And it's just like a horrifying war that left the country scarred, both politically and mentally. Like the people who came back never recovered. The politics never looked like good, and like you think that would be the worst of it, and then subsequently 9/11, and then Iraq, and then like I, even as a Canadian, I remember when everybody was going in to Afghanistan, like the American, I don't know, fighter pilots or something, like a bomber just like killed some American soldiers, I mean Canadian soldiers. And it was just like, what the fuck? But, you know, these racial divisions, they never went away, and it only became worse when they started dumping tons and tons of radicalized Muslims in your fucking country and shit, like Afghanis, Middle Eastern people, and it's just like, oh, refugee status, oh, it's gonna enrich your society and shit, and you don't feel more safe with them around. All they do is they link up with each other and then they try to intimidate you. It's just the obvious, outcome of what they're trying to achieve by coming over here. Some false premise of like world domination through subjugation. And the pedophiles, the dark Jews, they're having a kick at it because the inevitability was. And I said this before, and I don't think it's a theory. I think it's more substantiated in reality because when you really think about it, and I'm not trying to be like anti-Semitic about this, but when you really, really think about it, if Israel doesn't have to deal with like millions upon millions of fighting aged guys, who have no country, like their economies, like, going to shit and like they're just leaving to go to Europe basically to live off of welfare for the rest of their lives, not unlike these Orthodox Jewish enclaves in New York, like Upper Manhattan and stuff, or Jersey or whatever, wherever it is. It's almost as if it was the expectation that if they knew that if they adhere to this like religious class, that they would have these special types of treatments, and then the general population will be taxed to pay for them. But they see it as like, oh, you're the inferior person. You have to pay for our lifestyles and shit. And like, the reason why a guy like Rupert Lowe like comes to power is that you have like really, really terrible crimes. Like I spoke about this briefly. An Afghan migrant who came in on a boat and he was on like, benefits and stuff, and then like he essays a 12-year-old girl, films it with like his, camera phone or whatever, posts it, and then like after he does the crime because he has like benefits and shit, he uses that money and he goes to the convenience store to get something to drink. Kind of fucking horror that's pushed on you. The horrifying, melting pot of misery because like nobody wants them here, right? So with all these divisions, the Arab Spring, 9/11, subsequently October 7th, and then mass shooting attacks by like, various randomized groups, incels, terrorists. Now we're having trans radicalized, whatever, insane people, and it's all coming to almost a dire conclusion for them all, as they cannot reproduce. They cannot carry on their legacy. The actions that they have partaken in will only allow them to reproduce with the lowest common denominator, which is, you know, and I don't mean to be mean by saying this, but like we have to be mature adults when we come to the table of like, how you want to start a family and how you want to live your life and stuff. And I have to admit, like I just want my kids to have the best. So if I gotta be picky about that, I'm going to have to be picky. Now, again, like it could be that every single girl that I think I deserve does not like me back, and then I end up like, alone perpetually. And that's okay because, you know, I guess it's the greed of just wanting more, wanting better for my kids. Because like, yeah, I guess they can be okay looking like me, and like, I've managed to maintain my youth into my old age, my old 40-year-old age, going 41 this June. Um, I mean, I just want them to not have like, maybe I'm a little insecure about my nose, maybe I'm a little, insecure about my weight, maybe I'm a little insecure about, I guess, my wrist size or whatever, my bone size. I don't know, just some weird ass shit. And so what I'm getting at basically is this war that we're in right now, right? With these types of people who have no future, basically. Like, they don't really care about carrying on their legacy. Or if they do, it's like more or less circumstantial for them. It's just like, oh, I got someone, whatever, pregnant, and then I have to marry them, and then, like, we have kids and shit together. It's not like out of love. And it's something that we all have to start, getting used to, this melting pot of misery, because most likely this is what's going to happen, right? If Rupert Lowe comes into power, it's going to be a tidal wave effect that the rest of the world is going to feel. And there's more or less politicians that are like this guy, like the Japanese prime minister. Um, yeah, like Xi Jinping. He basically, like, I think he was made more or less like out of response to the whole release of the Epstein files. But President Xi said, yeah, we're gonna punish pedophilia with death penalty. So fucking cool, man. Like, that's so sick. Oh my god. And like, if you ask most people here if they would agree with that policy, it's a resounding yes. But like, you have to tap dance over the whole, ethics and morality of it. It's just like, ugh, you get so sick to your stomach with it, right? And most likely, if this re-immigration thing happens, what you're going to see in the reverse is the melting pot of misery, right? Where you have people coming back to their countries of origin, and it's like it was left desolated by them, being depleted out of the workforce to begin with, like the brain drain plus like the labor drain and all that. So like they are coming back to, it's skeleton crew country. Not enough food, not enough space, not enough anything. An endless hell from whence they came, and they're gonna fight tooth and nail. I could feel it. They know it probably more than I do, because it's like, I haven't actually been there. I've only seen and heard from these YouTube videos, these random, snippets. Imagine living there, and then you have to go back, and then like, oh my god, you're flooded with like all these other guys with you that came through just like you, like doing some like illegal human trafficking smuggler shit, and you're all just there. I don't know, like, at the airport or something, just like getting off that plane and like, surrounded by like all these, cops or whatever, and they're just like, nodding their head at you. I mean, I still think it's far-fetched, I'm gonna be honest with you, but, what if the reverse, the melting pot of misery? Ladies and gentlemen, take care.